Jan came to me through one of my favorite people on the planet, Tad Hargrave. And this man is a scholar. He is someone of such high integrity and exceptional taste and a lover of story. And once in a while, he graces me with an introduction to someone that blows the socks off my mind. And I'm not going to introduce Jan as someone that could do that. I want to introduce Jan as someone who's very, very ordinary. She actually said, as ordinary as you are. But someone who has committed herself to story in such a way and walking the path and walking the life and has gotten good recognition for her commitment, for her skill, for her talent. But what I also want to say is what I know about Jan just through the process of getting to know her this little tiny bit of walking towards what would we do with you today? You know, what will she bring? Is a woman that walks with a big heart, and a woman that walks with a lot of commitment, and a woman that really she's a web weaver where she has this commitment to the old stories and this real wake and aliveness to how do they live in our times. And this is, there's not a lot of people that are walking that bridge. And so I'm very, very honored to get to introduce Jan to you and to get to steep in her presence for a while. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to you, Jan.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you. Good afternoon, morning, evening. I don't know where you are in the world. So good day to everybody. I hope you're doing well. Yeah, this is the first time I've been in this situation where it's not something that I've created for myself. It's not my own course. So Leah and I had a conversation about what am I going to offer? What would you like me to offer? And we found ourselves talking about one particular traditional folk tale, which some of you may have heard. I don't know if any of you listened to the Gathering of Stories event in February. If you did, you will have heard this story. If you did not, then this story is going to be a nice surprise. We talked about this story and we talked about the assumptions made about the story based on one's cultural perspective or one's social setting, if you like. I hesitate to use the word privilege because I think it's a bit skim on the surface word. It's not about privilege. I think it's about the way one is educated, and one is educated to have a very narrow view of the world. I don't think that's a privilege. I think that's a disaster. I think that's a tragedy. And I think that when people approach stories from different cultures, they come with their own social mindset and it's logically try and impose those social mores upon the story that they're hearing, regardless of the value of it within the culture that it came from. It's like the heart of the story, the heart of what it means. It's almost as though that needs to be stripped away to give space for the listener's cultural understanding of that story and impact of that story, impact upon them of that story. And I'm not entirely sure that's useful for the person telling the story if they're from a particular cultural background. It's very difficult to stand in true relation with the story you're telling if after the telling of it, and this happens a lot, people come up to you and go, what was the point of that? Or I can't believe that you believe that. Or why are you telling a story like this in this day and age? And my argument is it's not about about the age. It's not about what I believe. The story is trying to tell me something. And I'm not going to skim the surface. If the story wants me to go deep, then I'll go deep. If the story rattles me, then I'm going to explore why the story rattles me rather than attack the story. I'm not going to make the story a mutant story to serve the needs, the cultural needs of an audience that might not understand where that story is coming from or why that story is told. Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm looking at you all in gallery view, so I don't like looking at my face when I'm talking. I like looking at the people. So we talked about this particular story, which I think I'm going to tell to you now, and then we can have a conversation about it. And I'd like to talk about it. Well, let me tell it first, okay? Where I'm sitting is very hot, so if suddenly you see beads of perspiration running down my nose, I apologize in advance. Once upon a time, there was a hunter. The hunter was lying in the arms of a broadleaf tree. He wore a long green smock shirt covered in talismans, pockets, cowrie shells, pockets filled with protective words or little juju beads or little images carved by his master, who had taught him how to sit in the arms of a broadleaf tree all night and not fall out. He had his bow and arrow trained on a buffalo and her calf. They were at a watering hole. He had a family to feed and meat to provide for his village. He had to make a decision. Should he shoot the buffalo or should he shoot the calf? He thought to himself, if I shoot the mother, then that's the end of that herd. So if I shoot the calf, at least the mother will be able to have more children in the future. So he pulled back the bowstring and shoom, he let the arrow fly. But that mother, hearing the whistle of that arrow and knowing what her role was within the great community of things, threw herself in the path of that arrow and shoom, the arrow went straight through her heart and she fell dead to the ground. The calf, startled, ran away into the bushes and watched wide-eyed as the hunter, not expecting to kill the mother, jumped down from the tree. Yo, he said. He ran to his kill. He took a knife. He made a small incision in the throat of the buffalo. He put his mouth against that hole and he sucked down the thick, red, iron-rich blood. And after he thanked the buffalo for giving its life, he took his large knife and off came the head. And he quartered the body of the buffalo and he opened his great sack and he threw the meat into the bag, tied the bag up, threw it over his shoulder and made his way out of the forest. The calf had observed all of this with her wide eyes. And now she came out from the bushes and she looked around and she saw where her mother's blood had been spilt and she saw the footsteps that the hunter had left leaving the forest. One was a deep indent in the forest floor. The calf stood on her hind legs and became a 7-year-old girl. And the 7-year-old girl walked to that deep indent in the forest floor and she measured her foot against it. And she said, I'm too young, but one day I will have my revenge. And then she went to find dry grass and sticks and leaves and she covered over that indent. And she vowed that she would return to that place every year on the anniversary of her mother's death to measure her foot in the indent left by the hunter to see if she was old enough to take revenge. And true to her word, every year she came back and she measured her foot. And seeing that she was too young, she would go and she would rejoin the herd. One year when she was about 16 years old, she stood there as female, as woman, as human, and she measured her foot in that indent in the forest floor and saw that her foot almost filled it. I'm ready, she said. And she didn't rejoin the herd. She stayed in human form and she walked. She had a very vivid picture in her mind of the man who had killed her mother. He wore a long green smock shirt covered in pockets and talismans, cowrie shells. She would recognize him anywhere, but she walked for many days, many weeks, many months. She walked for a year and a day until finally she found herself in a village. In this village, there was a huge bustling market. There were two men arguing over a leopard skin. One man wanted to buy the leopard skin with the whiskers attached. The one who was selling the leopard skin insisted that the leopard skin could not be sold with the whiskers attached, because everybody knew that the whiskers could be cut up and put in food and used as poison to destroy an enemy. He didn't want to sell it with the whiskers. So there was a tugging and a pulling and a tugging and a pulling. He wore a long green smock shirt covered in cowrie shells and pockets. And the young woman, the buffalo woman, when she saw him, if you had cut her at that moment, you wouldn't have found blood, you would have found iced water. Her heart clenched. She turned on her heels and she left that village to the outskirts of the village. Because on her way into the village, she'd passed a little house. And sitting outside that little house was an old woman with grey, thick hair. And lines upon lines upon lines. Lines of wisdom. We call them wrinkles, but they are lines of wisdom. And the old woman, she'd been sitting there humming, singing to herself. She'd lived a good life. The young woman approached the elder and she said, "Grandmother." And the old woman looked up at her and she said, "Oh, what a beauty you are." She said, "Grandmother, that's why I've come to you. I want you to make me really beautiful." "Ah," said the old woman. "How much more beauty do you want? Greedy." She said, No, it's not that, grandmother. It's just that there's a man and I want him to love me." "Ah," said the old woman. "I understand perfectly. I was young once. I can help you." She said, "This is what I will do for you. But first, I want you to take this." And she picked up a calabash bowl, an empty calabash bowl, and she gave it to the young woman. She said, "There's my goat. Milk it." And so the young woman, she bent down and she milked that goat. She filled that calabash bowl. Meanwhile, the old woman had got up from where she was and gone behind her little house, a little hovel. And behind that house, there was a tree. And in that tree, there was a bee's nest. And the old woman who had put her hands into that nest so many times and been stung so many times that she didn't feel the pain, and she pulled out honeycomb and little grubs with it. And she came back to where the young woman was, and she dropped the honey and the honeycomb and all the grubs, all the little bee grubs into that milk. And then she said, "Wait." She went into the little house and she pulled out an old tin bath. She dragged that tin bath in front of the young woman, and then she came out again with another 2 bowls, calabash bowls, and she said, "Water. There's water behind the house." So the young woman, she went and she filled her 2 calabash bowls full of water. She filled the bath backwards and forwards till the bath was full. Then the old woman said, "Now remove your clothes." The young woman removed her clothes immediately. And the old woman helped her to step into that tin bath. And as she stepped into the tin bath, the old woman, she put her hand in the milk and the honey and she rubbed them together, mashing up the grubs, all the bees, the honeycomb, the wax. She mashed it all up together and she began to rub it all over the young woman. From her hair right down, she rubbed it into her breast, into her back, into her belly, in between her legs, in between her toes, in between her fingers, her ears, her face. She rubbed it completely with the milk and the honey. And then she took bowls full of that water and she rinsed her off. Bowlfuls of water, she rinsed her and she rinsed her. And as she rinsed her, it was as though every mark, every blemish, every fleck, every dot and every spot was washed away. And that young woman, she stood there, shining with beauty. And the old woman said, my. Come on, out. And she helped her out of the bath. She went into a little house and she came out with cloths, which she used to dry the young woman's skin. Then she took shea butter and she rubbed the shea butter in her hands until it became melted and liquid. And then she rubbed the shea butter all over the young woman, in her hair, her face, her back, her belly, in between her legs, in between her toes, in between her fingers. She rubbed her till she shone like polished brass. And then she brought out a long piece of indigo blue cloth, which she wrapped around the young woman's body and then threw over her shoulder. Then she said, sit. And the young woman sat between the old woman's legs and she began to plait her hair. She plaited and twisted and plaited her hair, made it into the most beautiful and intricate style. And then she said, stand. And the young woman stood up and turned and faced the old woman. The old woman said, ah, if I was a young woman, I would fight you for your beauty. But I honor you, she said. I honor you. And I believe that if this man didn't love you before, he will love you now. Good luck. Thank you, grandmother, said the buffalo woman. Thank you. And she left and made her way back to the village. The hunter was exhausted arguing with the man. He was not going to sell it with the whiskers. And at that moment, a beautiful woman dressed in an indigo blue cloth, with hair in the most intricate style, with skin that shone like the sun in the sky, walked before him, and he let go the leopard skin. He didn't hear the man offer to pay. He didn't hear the man offer to give him whatever he wanted. He just was transfixed by this beautiful woman who had now stopped in front of him and was looking at him and was smiling a dazzling smile, a smile as though 7 suns had risen in the sky. And she leant forwards and she said, I wonder if you could help me. And he said, of course, anything. Well, what can I do for you? And she said, I'm a woman traveling alone. Night will soon fall, and I have nowhere to stay. I observed your interaction with that man before. You're strong, you're powerful. And I think if I'm to ask anyone in this village for hospitality, it should be you. What do you say? Will you honor the 3 days and 3 nights of hospitality offered to any stranger? He said, but of course, he said. And if he could have blushed, he would have blushed. He was overwhelmed by how beautiful she was. He was overwhelmed by the fact that she chose him. He said, but of course. And he gathered his skins together and all the things that he needed. And he said his goodbyes. And he said, please follow me. And as they were walking, he said, you know, the 3 days and 3 nights that you spend in my house, you would be doing me a great service. I live with my mother. And sometimes I have to go for long spells in the forest. The other women, they take care of, but it would ease my heart to know that somebody was in the house with her, even if it is just for 3 days and 3 nights. But of course, she said, she demurred. Of course, quid pro quo. They approached the house. His mother was sitting there, sucking on a clay pipe, dreaming her dreams of what life used to be before she was a mother, wondering if her son would ever marry, wondering if she would ever dandle her grandchildren on her knees when she saw her son approaching with a woman, a stunningly beautiful woman. But she took one look at that woman and she felt fear. Her son approached. He said, Mother, we are offering this young woman hospitality, as is our tradition. She will stay for 3 days and 3 nights and then she will leave. Is that not right? The young woman said, yes, that's right. You are welcome, said the mother. Please, excuse me one moment. My son, may I speak to you? She took him to one side. She said, who is that woman? He said, I just told you she's a traveler. She's a stranger. She's asked me to give hospitality. Why she asked you? I don't know. He said, you know, she said. Why she asked you? She thought I was strong. She thought I was powerful. She thought maybe I would give her protection. She said, you're a donkey. That's what you are. You're a donkey because you don't know what I know. This plain as day. This woman hates you. How can she hate me? He said, I've never seen her before in my life. She hates you. Can't you tell? Can't you see it in her eyes? She hates you like poison. What did you do to her? He said, Mother, I've never met this woman before in my life. How can she hate me? No good will come of this, said his mother. Mark my words. Take my foolish advice. Send her away. He said, I can't. I've offered her hospitality. It would be rude. She said, all right, but on your head be it. First night she stayed, she made herself indispensable to the old woman and the hunter. Second day, same thing. She was indispensable. She did all the cooking. She went and gathered the firewood. She gathered the water. No. Nothing was too difficult for her to do. Third day, it was the same. The hunter, who mysteriously was not spending any time in the forest, he was watching, observing, drinking her in. And each day, his feelings for her grew deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until finally she filled his heart. And when on the 4th morning, she prepared herself to leave, he said, where are you going? She said, the days of hospitality have passed. It's time for me to leave. I'm very grateful to you and to your mother. Now I must go. He said, but where will you go? She said, somewhere. he said, don't go. She said, but I must. He said, no, you don't have to go. She said, explain yourself. What do you mean? He said, you can stay. She said, under what circumstances would I stay? And he said, you know. She said, I'm sorry, I don't know. Why should I stay? He said, because. She said, well, tell me. He said, because if you leave, you will take my heart with you. And how can a man live without his heart? Stay, he said. Be with me. Marry me. Choose me. I'll provide everything. Tell me who your people are. I can pay the bride price, whatever it is. Tell me where they are. I will go to them now. I will speak to your father. I will speak to your mother. At which point, great big fat tears began to roll down her cheeks. He said, I've offended you. I'm sorry, that's the worst thing. I would never want to offend you. I'm so sorry. She said, I'm not offended. I'm not offended. He said, well, what's the matter? Why are you crying? Am I so repulsive? She said, no, it's not that. My mother was murdered when I was 7 years old. I don't know my father. I wander the place and I stop in different communities and I ask for hospitality. I don't know where to be. I'm dispossessed. And he took her in his arms and he held her and he said, please, please, choose me. Stay here. You don't have to be dispossessed. You don't have to wander the streets. You don't. Stay here. I will be your family. I will be your mother, your father. Stay with me. And he felt her relax. She said, very well, I will. You can imagine his mother's attitude when he told her. She said, are you mad? I told you this woman hates you. This will not end well. It will end in tears. And now you want to marry. Who is she? Where are her people? Where do they come from? He said, I don't know. She said, her parents are dead. You want to marry someone you don't know their people? Are you mad? Send her away. He said, I can't. He said, mother, I love you. You're my mother. But I'm a man and I must have what I must have. And that woman, she needs me. And I need her. And I will marry her. Give me your blessing. She said, I can't. I can't give you my blessing because it will not end well. But you're my son and I will protect you. The arrangements were made for the wedding. The bride looked beautiful. The groom was happy. The palm wine flowed. The drummers drummed. The women ululated. The dances were danced. The meat was cooked. Everybody was happy. They licked their fingers. In the house, the mother, she came to her son and she said, my son, I couldn't prevent you from marrying this woman, but I said I would protect you. And from around her neck, she took, hanging on a leather string, a leather pouch. In the leather pouch, there was an egg, a gold ring, and a stone. And she said, you take these and you keep them with you. You never take it from around your neck. And you promise me that from this day, whenever you go hunting, take your spear. Do you understand? He said, I don't understand, but I'm glad you haven't fully rejected me. She said, you're my son. I will always protect you. I will always love you, but I will never agree with this stupidity. That night, a blanket was hung on a string that was tied from one side of that house to the other, separating the space. Mother slept on one side, husband and wife on the other side. The wife, the buffalo woman, she made it her business to find out what his weakness was, because every hunter, even if they have protective talismans, they have a weakness. And if she could get to that weakness, she knew she could destroy him. So every night, after they made love and they lay in each other's arms, she would say, I've noticed that when the other hunters come back from the hunt, they're covered in scratches or bites or marks, but your skin, not a mark, not a scratch, not a bite. Why is that? It's your power, isn't it? Tell me about that power. What is it that would destroy you? Now, his mother had told him, never share the secret of your talismans. Never share your weakness, your taboos with anybody. Nobody at all. But this wife, she was insistent. She was like a termite. She was like, you know, those wood lice that They dig and they dig and they dig until your house collapses because they've chewed away at the very foundation of your property. She was one of those. She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. But the old woman on the other side of the cloth, every night, she would say, either make me a grandmother or go to sleep. Until one night, the wife got clever and she waited. She waited till she could hear the soft snoring of the old woman on the other side. And then she turned to her husband and she said, well, tell me, I'm your wife. Shouldn't I know what can hurt you, what can harm you? If you tell me I can help, I can protect. Tell me, why are you so strong? What is it that protects you? And he said, I can't. Look, we've talked about this many times. My mother wouldn't agree. He said, she goes, why didn't you marry your mother then? You should have married your mother, not me. And she turned her back to him. And he said, she said, don't touch me. Go and touch your mother. Leave me alone. And he lay there and he said, oh my goodness me. He didn't want to argue with his wife. So he said, look, I'll tell you. She said, tell me, don't tell me. I don't care. Do what you like. I will never ask you again. And he said, all right, I'll tell you, relax. And he began to tell her. He told her that if a broom, an African broom, a ballet, had been worn down and thrown at him, a broom that had been used by a woman and was then thrown at him, he would lose all his protection. He would lose all his power and all his protection. None of his talismans would work. None of the little jujus would work. Nothing. He would be as weak as a baby and as vulnerable as one too. And when he told her, she turned to him and she said, so that wasn't so difficult, was it? I'm your wife. Don't worry. I will always protect you and I will always keep your secret. Come, she said, come into my arms. The next morning, he leapt out of that bed. He was elated. It was as though all the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. It felt good to share that with his wife. It felt good to tell her the truth. He got out of his bed. He washed himself. He dressed himself. He said his prayers. And then he began to prepare the poison for the tips of his arrows. He gathered together all his arrows. He put them in his quiver. He picked his rifle up. He threw the rifle across his back. He was just about to snatch up the spear when he saw his wife lying there. He could see the rise and fall of her body as she breathed. And oh my God, last night was wonderful. And she was wonderful. And he felt unburdened. And in distraction, he left the house and left the spear right there. She was not asleep. The old woman was asleep on the other side of the blanket, but she was not. And as soon as he was gone, she stood up and she grabbed a fresh broom from the basket and she began to sweep. The old woman, she heard this sound. She woke up, she rubbed her eyes. She couldn't understand what the sound was. She pulled the curtain, the blanket, I should say, that was dividing the room. She saw her daughter-in-law naked, sweeping. And there was a hardness on that face. There was intention in her eyes. And the old woman, she sat back down. She said, that fool, he told her. He told her. She thought, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? She stood up, she sat down, she wrung her hands. And then she said, daughter-in-law, I'm thirsty. It's time for my tea. Can you go and fetch the water? And the young woman, she stopped and she looked at the old woman and she said, I'm sweeping. Fetch your own water. Shoo, shoo, shoo. The old woman didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to do. That was her son. She knew what was coming. She knew. She sat down, she stood up, she wrung her hands. And then she said, daughter-in-law, I'll fetch the water if you fetch the firewood to make the fire. She said, fetch your own firewood, old lady. I'm sweeping. Shoo, shoo, shoo. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what to do. And then she said, daughter-in-law, you and I, we should go into the forest together. And my son is a great hunter, but my mother taught me how to trap birds, and I could teach you our methods for trapping birds. Leave off that sweeping now. Come with me. Let's go into the... Fetch your own birds, old woman, she said. I'm sweeping. And she continued to sweep. And the old woman didn't know what to do. And she refused to move from that spot. Sweeping, sweeping, sweeping. And the villagers were coming this way and that way. And they could see something was off. Her intention they could see was not good. There was something in her eyes. They greeted her. She didn't even answer them. She just kept sweeping, 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 sweeping. Like a machine, she didn't stop. She stood there all day, and the broom was wearing down, wearing down, wearing down, wearing down. And he was coming back, and the sun was moving across the sky and was now crimson, crimson red. And he came with an elephant, a baby elephant on his head, an antelope over his shoulders, and he had a rabbit tied to his foot. The meat was to be distributed amongst the whole village. He was happy. He was unburdened. His wife loved him. He trusted her. And as he came down the hill towards the village, he saw her standing there outside the house, sweeping. The penny didn't drop. His first thought was, my wife is so beautiful. Look at her standing there in the dying rays of the sun. She's so beautiful. And then suddenly he was like, but why is she standing there like that? And the people were walking past, and he could see the people were looking at her strangely. And he dropped everything and he ran to his wife and he said, what are you doing? Why are you standing here naked? Put on your clothes. She said, don't touch me. He said, what's the matter with you? She had never looked at him like that. What's the matter with you? She said, you're a murderer. You killed my mother, and today you will pay. He said, I've never met your mother. What are you talking about? But she didn't answer. Well, she did answer. She answered by throwing that worn down broom at him. And it struck him hard in the chest. It struck him like a bullet. And as it hit, he felt all his protection leaving him. He felt all his power leave. It was as though someone had poured freezing cold water over his body. And his power was leaving in drips from his fingertips, his ears, his toes. And then to make matters worse, as he stood there, completely stunned by what had happened, she went down on her hands and knees, and she began to transform. She became what she was. She became a huge buffalo, huge sweeping horns that looked as though she'd spent hours sharpening them to perfection. Her back broadened, a tail unfurled from the back. Her face broadened, her nose broadened. She began to scrape at the ground with her hooves. Where there were two legs, there were now hooves. Where there were hands and paws and, hands and nails, there were now hooves, thick, strong. And she scraped at the ground and she looked down at him and she was about to charge when a voice said, run! It was his mother. And the mother's voice woke him up from his transfixion, from his shock, and he began to run. And the mother, the old woman, she began to run with him. They say, any mother in this room knows that if someone is attacking your child, you find the strength, and in this case, the speed of 10 men. She was running next to her son. She said, my son, the things I gave you on your wedding day, you will need them now. And he pulled that bag from around his neck. She said, take out the egg. He put his hand in the bag and he pulled out the egg. She said, throw it over your shoulder. He threw the egg over his shoulder. It hit the ground and the sea. A great ocean separating the mother and son from the buffalo, but no seawater was as salt as the tears she cried on the day her mother died, and she swam right through the sea and continued to chase them. The mother running with her son, she said, now the stone. He pulled out the stone, threw it over his shoulder. It hit the ground. A mountain range, but no mountain was as hard as her heart, or for that matter, as hard as her head, as she charged right through the mountain and gave chase. Mother and son were running. She said, son, the ring. He took out the gold ring, he threw it over his shoulder. It hit the ground. A wall of fire. Fire separating mother and son from the buffalo, but there was no fire that was as hot as the grief and pain she felt on the day her mother died, and she ran straight through the flames. And the mother said, now your spear. The spear was at home. He said, I don't have my spear. I'm sorry, I don't have my spear. She said, you're a donkey. I've told you before and I'll tell you again. But she then turned herself into the spear. Her thin, spindly legs became the shaft of the spear. Her body as well became the shaft of the spear. Her head became the spearhead. And all the love that she had for her son, she concentrated in the tip of that spearhead. And that spearhead spoke to her son, throw me over your shoulder. And he snatched up his mother and he threw her over his shoulder. He launched her over his shoulder and she flew like a bird towards that buffalo woman and right through the heart and out the other side. and the buffalo fell to the ground. For the second time in its life, the hunter was completely transfixed. He was in shock. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know whether to go up, down, right, left, in or out. He was rooted to the spot. And once again, it was his mother's voice, son, son, please. And so he turned, trembling as he was, and he walked back towards his mother, stepping over the dying throes of the half buffalo, half woman that he had married, that he had given his heart to, towards his mother who was now smeared from head to toe in her ordinary form, in the blood of the buffalo. The son, who was also the husband, scooped up his mother and he took her home. And he bathed her and he dressed her. And for the first time in their life, they talked about what love and what love was not. And that is the end of my story. Because what's the only thing he did that was nonsensical was let someone have a leopard skin with the whiskers on. But would you say that whether or not he'd let that person have the skin or not have the skin, do you think that would have stopped the daughter-in-law from her intention? So is it his fault then? If you look at the story in terms of what happened as opposed to what you throw on it, did he do anything that was nonsensical? When we feel what we feel, especially when it comes to the heart, does good sense in the initial stages, is it about good sense or is it about this visceral response? Did he really do anything that bad? He literally went, oh my God. We've all had those moments, haven't we? We've all had those, oh my God. And then someone goes, and you go, yeah, what? He's a human being. He might be in a story, but he's a human being as well. Why should he be any different? Okay, so just so, I don't know if any of you know this, but this story is from Côte d'Ivoire. No, it's not from Côte d'Ivoire. It's from Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso and those West African countries, they view the buffalo as a goddess. And the buffalo goddess offers her life to hunters. So the relationship between hunter and goddess in the form of buffalo is a symbiotic one. The hunter honors her, she offers her life for them. So the her diving in the path of the arrow is not just a selfless act to protect her child. Diving in the path of that arrow is her way of saying, this is my function.
Yeah.
Also, I think the fact that the child was only 7 years old meant that she could never be initiated into her role as goddess.
Yeah.
Because her mother's dead. So what is left is the wound. And she acts out of the wound because she doesn't know what her role is, because her mother's not there to teach it to her. Her role is to sacrifice her life for hunters, for the benefit of the people who worship her. The mother knew that. The daughter didn't know that. But that's, if you think about the buffalo woman in those same terms, then you see that, first of all, the death of the mother is not selfless.
Yeah.
This is her job. This is what I do. I'm the buffalo.
Yeah.
And the behavior, and we all do it, there's a trauma, we arrest there, and we live out our lives according to that thing. Do you think she should have accepted the hunter's love? It's a question for everybody.
Yeah.
Do you think she should have accepted the hunter's love? It's not a test, it's just a question. I think there's something else that I'm sitting with and have been sitting with for a while. is that it's a difficult one, because I understand from an emotional perspective why one would choose not to eat meat. I understand it. I understand honoring of all life and life being sacred. But I want to go back to what I began this whole evening with, which is to do with, if you're living in a particular community and you need to have certain types of food because your community, generation after generation after generation, you're non-white, non-European, non-educated in a European mindset, not living with the social or economic conditions that we live with here. I'm not making judgments about either one, but it's different. It's coming from a different place. It's coming with a different energy. It's coming with a different mindset. So I understand how it's painful for you as a vegan to hear that story. But I also wonder, like you say, what is the answer? How does my story, when and where can my story be okay to tell? When and where can the social mores, cultural mores, religious or spiritual mores of the people in the stories that I tell be okay? Because this is, I come up against this kind of thing all the time. And it's almost as though on the surface, what I am is great, it's wonderful, wow, God, Jan's amazing, blah, 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 blah. But on the back end, the material that I choose to tell, which I see as being raised in a colonial environment, in a white-minded colonial environment, I mean, trying to stitch yourself back together so that you feel whole within that community, within that environment, is something that I've found necessary to do by using stories. I don't walk down the road, I don't punch my fist, I don't protect, I don't do it that way. I do it through story. I find stories that give me something to fall back into that makes me feel whole. Do you know that game you play where you lean, the trust game, where you lean back and someone catches you and stands you up again? That's what the stories do for me. So, but what I'm faced with on a regular basis, living in the West, telling those stories which are stitching me back together, making me feel whole, I'm constantly faced with the question or the challenge that that's not okay. What you lean into to make yourself whole isn't okay. It's very, very challenging, you know? So I sit with that all the time. Every time I open my mouth to tell a story where there's a hunter, I have to be ready for what you just said to me. I have to prepare myself for that. I know you're not challenging me personally, but I'm just, in the same way you're sitting with yours, I'm sitting with mine. I'm just giving you some insight. I'm not challenging you or your life choices or your heart in any way, shape, or form. I just want you to see that with every pushback that comes, the thing that is holding me together, I'm being told constantly it's not okay. Yeah.
I want to interrupt just for one moment.
Yeah.
I'm listening to, I'm just grateful for the conversation. So I just want to say, Jan, thank you so much for not glossing over this moment and for bringing so forward what happens in these moments. And I'm having two thoughts come from one ears. Deborah, I'm holding your question of why this story today, given what you're coming in with your intention. And Jan, I'm having a really funny laugh. Right before you all came on, we looked at what we said we were going to happen today. And we looked through the copy, and somewhere in there it said, looking at cultural blind spots. And Jen was like, I didn't write that. And I was like, well, I didn't write that. And we were like, well, that's not our agenda. And here we are. And here we are. And so I'm having a great cosmic laugh at this. And what I want to just presence and bring us back to is actually something that Chloe said last time. She read us that Rumi poem. There's a field outside of right and wrong. I'll meet you there. And to me, this is what sacred storytelling, standing at the threshold of a sacred story, listening to stories as sacred storytellers means that we have this opportunity to receive a story and remove the lens, and Jan began to introduce this a little bit, remove our cultural lens of what we have been taught or believe is right and wrong. Okay, so Deborah, I'm saying this. I want to say this beside what you're talking about because I fully respect your values and your belief systems and what you hold and who you are as a protector. Deborah, I meant to say, and I want to also say I want to speak to and honor the responsibility of sacred storytellers and what it means to receive a story that comes from a culture other than ours. Is to take a moment to listen to the gift and the wisdom that comes through that might be very, very foreign from the world that we live in and might hit up against so many of the things that we're conscious about having it get hit up and the things that we're not. And one of the things I love about story, those moments when we can do what we're doing right now, and it's feeding the story, it's talking back. Where did it hit you? Where did it snag you? Where did it grab you? And those are the parts where it's knocking on your door, and it's knocking it, and it's trying to raise our attention. And sometimes it's speaking in a language other than ours. It's like when you hear a calling, and it's really frustrating when that calling comes to you and it's not a language that you can understand, and it can keep yelling at you. But if you don't speak the language, you can't hear it, but you feel the calling. And sometimes stories that come from other cultures in a way that doesn't speak our language, we actually have to learn the language of that from where the story comes from to fully begin to even taste and to catch the scent of it fully in the full six dimensionality of what it has to offer. So I just want to add that to our conversation because everything that's coming up today deepens our conversation and understanding of what it means to meet story. So I'm grateful for all of it. And I also want to remind us the task that's brought forth as sacred storytellers of how do we meet a story, and can we be so humble, and I mean this, can we be humble at the feet of a story as to listen to it when it's coming at us in a way that we don't recognize or even up against something that we know in our system as right or wrong. Can we be so humble as to hear it for what it has to offer?
And so I'm going to throw another question in here now. Going back to this idea of when you don't have the people in your life to guide you, your parents or your grandparents, what role does community play?
What role can what play?
Community. What role does community play then in all of that? So for the buffalo woman, who would go back to the herd every time she changed back, there are things missing in this story. But going back to the story itself, I'm trying to knit it together, the logic of it, okay? And when I teach storytelling, I'm always trying to get my students to understand the logic that the story is offering, okay? We have a community of buffalo who understand that buffalo females are goddesses. We have a community of buffalo who know that someone has lost their parent. Something's missing. Something is missing. Do you see what I mean? Yes. That the story hasn't been passed on. The story hasn't been given. The person who's lost has not been held. The person who is suffering the loss, I should say, has not been held, has not been brought back into herself. If that had happened, obviously we wouldn't have a story, but if that had happened, maybe she would have understood herself and her mother's act in a different way.
Right, as a sacrifice.
Sorry, what was that, Loki?
As a sacrifice.
Yes.
She was sacrificing herself.
Yeah, and that was part of their role. Now we can say,
Yes.
should that be the role of a woman to sacrifice? You know, we can look at that analogy.
Mm-mm.
But I just want to look at this moment about community. Like when we get lost, as you were saying, Fiona, when our components get lost or trauma intervenes and stops our blossoming, where is community then? Has community become the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the head shrinker? Is that now what we're calling community? I only ask questions. I have no answers. Yeah, I just ask questions, and hopefully they shake something loose. But yeah, I mean, it's so, you know, it's this thing of living side by side. You know, we're in a world that, because of colonialism, because of imperialism, because of the need to conquer, we are now thrust into each other's lives. We have to live side by side. But the person who always has to give something up is the person who's been forced to give something up historically all the way along the line. And it's very, very, very challenging. I was talking to someone the other day, slight digression, but it's Tad actually. And I was talking about and I don't say this to be disingenuous in any way, shape or form, okay?
Yes.
I just want to say that to begin with. But there's a thing that's been going around recently. Someone even sent me a message the other day. And they want to talk about wildness in women, to be wild, the wild woman, expressing the wild woman, etc., etc. I grew up being told as a Black woman that my wildness was too wild. My wildness was not an attractive wildness. My wildness was scary wildness. So I shouldn't be wild. And I was saying to Tad, it's as though the colonial mindset, the conquering mindset, comes to a place, tramples underfoot everything that you are, tramples it, destroys it in order to prop up a system. Yes, I know. I mean, I'm not individually blaming anything for anyone for anything, rather. But the system does that, tramples you to dust, repurposes you for its own uses. And then after the dust has been trampled, there's a sifting through, and it's like, oh, look what I found in this thing that I just crushed. It's really cool. I'm going to repurpose this, and I'm going to make money out of it.
Yes.
And at the moment, the wild woman is from my perspective, is one of those things.
Yes.
Suddenly, to be wild is, you know, de rigueur. To be wild is the thing, man. And it's just like, God damn it. If I got into trouble at anything at school, it's for being wild. And not in the way the white girls were being harassed about it. Because fundamentally, as a Black woman, your wildness is a threat. Your wildness is dangerous. Your wildness challenges the status quo. This wildness needs to be contained. And then you turn around 3 decades later, and it's like, wow, yeah, let's be wild on purpose. And it's just like, that's how I feel. I'll show you wild on purpose. That's what it makes me feel, you know? Yes. But anyway, let's not go down that one. Some things just need to be said. If you can remember, we've discussed the story on many levels. I would like, and this is purely a storytelling exercise, okay? I would like you to choose from within this story one person. It doesn't have to be one of the main characters. It could be one of the peripheral characters that I mentioned. And I would like you, and what I'd like you to do is to choose one character from the story And I want you to imagine that the other person who's with you, hopefully you won't have chosen the same character, but even if you have, it doesn't matter. I want you to tell what happened, what you witnessed, what you observed. Imagine you are that character, okay? I want you to, no, I'm going to do a different exercise, a better exercise. So when a storyteller walks through a story and says, once upon a time, my assertion is that the storyteller is a witness to something. You've witnessed something and you've witnessed it through your senses. So what I'd like you to do as individuals is I would like you to close your eyes, and I would like you to walk to your favorite point in the story. Okay? Walk to your favorite point in the story, and I want you to go through the 5 senses and experience the story via your 5 senses. So walk to your favorite part of the story and then look at everything. Then hear everything. Then touch everything. And smell everything. And taste everything. Okay? That's what I'd like you to do. I will give you, how much time do we have left, Leah?
We have
about 15 minutes.
left. 20 minutes.
About 20 minutes. Okay. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do this. Just be there. You're in the story, fully in it. Walk to that part of the story and experience it through the 5 senses. Okay. If you would like, you can turn your screen off so you don't have me staring at you as you're sitting there with your eyes closed. If you don't mind, keep it on. I don't mind either. I'm not necessarily wanting you to make notes. I want you to experience it. And then after that, we'll talk about it. Okay? And your 10 minutes starts.
Jan, just a point of order. They're going into the breakout group for
No,
that?
they can stay where they are. They can stay where they are because the exercise I was going to do before isn't going to work.
Okay.
So that's why I've quickly done this.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Leah. I should have made that clear. So you're going to sit where you are now. Your 10 minutes starts now. You all have about a minute and a half left. Okay, so you're now going to be thrown into a gently placed, I should say, gently placed into a breakout room by Leah. You'll be partnered with somebody else. And this is the way the exercise goes. One of you is A, one of you is B, or one of you is one of you is two. You decide which it is. A will answer questions that B asks. And the first question will be, what did you see? And A, your job is just to say what you saw at your favorite part of the story. For instance, my favorite part of the story is actually the beginning of the story. So what I've written is, this is just as an exercise. What did you see? I saw a tall tree with huge leaves standing taller than the others. I saw the light glistening on the surface of water. I saw a buffalo with her calf nudging it towards the water, encouraging it to drink, etc., etc. And you do that with each of the senses. Okay? You each get a chance to do that. So you're each going to get 5 minutes. If you don't get through all the senses, don't worry. At the 5-minute mark, swap. And the other person will become the questioner, and the one who was answering questions, the one who was asking questions will now answer them. Is that clear? Okay.
I'll give a little 5-minute warning.
Cool. Thank you.
Don't forget that at the second person at 4 minutes, you're going to see the little, you've got 1 minute left. Don't click the button. Let that person finish off their whole final minute. But that's when we'll all come back. See you soon.
See you soon. Greetings. So we don't have much time left, and I know that Leah wants to wrap up. So question, how did you find that exercise? We've come to I think we've run out of time, and I'm really sorry that we have, because there's so much more to hear. I can tell there's so much more to hear. But just very quickly, I want to touch on something that Kay just said. Storytellers who come from the sacred, I believe, transcend time and space. Transcend space and time. They can be present in two places at the same time. They're present in front of the audience, but they're also, as you said, Kay, fully present in the moment that the story is happening. They're in the story as it's happening, 100% active, present, alert to what's happening in the story. But at the same time, which is why I always have to be in gallery view, they're alert, receptive, 100% present on the audience as well, at the same time, with the same level of intensity, with the same level of focus. So I'm glad that you raised that, because it gave me the opportunity to say it, Kay. Transcending space, time, but being 100% present at the same time is not something every storyteller can do. And to me, that is sacred. And now I'm going to hand it back to you, Leah.
And Jen, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I hope that it was
Thank
as
you.
impactful as I would have liked it to be.